Gary, I'm stoked about this partnership that we just lined up with Fuji Sports.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible. We are going to have a monthly giveaway, and all you need to do to enter that is go to therolradio.com/belt and take a survey. And that survey is, do you wash your belt? The age-old question in jiu-jitsu. Do you wash your belt? All the rules are there. So super simple, super quick, and they are going to be giving away some amazing, amazing stuff.
Why wouldn't you want free gear? I mean, think about it for a second. One, you're helping us solve this mega question in jiu-jitsu. Do you do or you do not wash your belt? Two, you can see the results on our website as this entire thing is unfolding. And three, you're entering into the giveaway of free gear from Fuji. So just cast your
Check it
vote.
out. Yep. therolradio.com/belt. Cast your vote, and let's get to the show. On this episode of RŌL Radio, we have arguably the most successful American Judoka in history and BJJ Black Belt, Travis Stevens. Listen as Travis tells us his amazing martial arts journey, a journey that started by sheer accident as a child and led him all the way to the Olympic Games. A journey that also includes receiving his BJJ Black Belt from one of the biggest names in the sport. Travis also discusses what is needed to further grow the sport of judo in the U.S. and his unique view on the mental aspects of becoming a champion and how he excels at the very different sports of judo and BJJ. Here's RŌL Radio with BJJ Black Belt under John Danaher, three-time Olympian and Judo Silver Medalist in the 2016 Olympic Games, Travis Stevens.
Welcome to RŌL Radio.
And we're live. Good morning, Gary.
Good morning. This is usually something we do later in the day, but I've got my cup of Joe. I think everybody's got a cup of coffee. So
You look extra grumpy today.
it's hard for me to get extra grumpy, but I'm here. So let's get started. Let's do this. I think we're going to have a good one today.
Travis Stevens in the house. Travis, good morning. How are you, sir?
I'm doing good. Happy to be here.
Thank you.
How is everything going for you? Holidays behind us. How is everything going on your family front, on your professional front? Share with us some good news.
Well, with COVID happening, I'm just happy that all the businesses that I'm a part of and that I own are still up and running. So that's all I really have to be grateful for. You know, anybody in this situation kind of going through it, that's my takeaway from 2020 was, can I still do what I was doing in 2020, 2019, and 2021? Then it was a good year.
Yeah, and I think you bring up a really good point. It's so easy today to focus on the negative and even on the obstacles of life, things that we can't do, that it's difficult for us to appreciate the things that we can do or the opportunities that we had ahead of us. So I'm glad to hear that that's your view on life. And we'll dig into some of this a little bit more as we go through this conversation. But as always, we start with our guests, how all this started. So I'm curious to kind of bring it, because your story is very, very interesting. You clearly come from well-established judo career, but even starting your judo, from at least my readings and my knowledge, it was very interesting in the very, very beginning. Do you mind sharing how was you stepping on the mat for the very first time, how you encountered judo in the very beginning?
Yeah, of course. It was 100% by accident. I accidentally signed up for the wrong sport at a local youth center. And then sure enough, I got stuck with it through the season. And you know what? From the second week I was there, absolutely loved it. I couldn't get enough of it.
So what was what did you sign up for and you end up with judo?
Well, I actually signed up for judo. So what happened was they had like a checkbox, and on the other side of the paper was the sport, but there was nothing connecting them. So like when I looked at the thing, my eyes, because I'm dyslexic, I went to the wrong line, didn't sign up for football, signed up for judo, and sure enough, got stuck with it.
So what was your first thought? You get to the session and there's no football, there's judo. Do you even know what judo is at that point?
I had no idea. But I was fortunate enough to know before I got there, because they had sent everybody in the mail that like schedule of like when classes and practices and all that was. So, like I knew right when I got my schedule that I had messed up. So, but I didn't, the internet really wasn't around back then. So I didn't have a way of like looking at it or seeing what it was. I just knew it was a martial art and I was going to be doing it for the next 4 months.
Well, that's an interesting spin on this. And what's your first class here? Like, because obviously football is very different from judo. A lot of people don't even know what judo is.
It was terrifying. It was terrifying. It was inside of a gym with some fold out mats. They had laid out like 60 fold out mats, all Velcroed together. So it was like concrete. And I specifically remember the sensei at the time made me sit right next to him because everybody had to watch class one. You couldn't just jump out there and go do it. And in the middle of the warm up, one of the kids was like messing around, and he stopped class. He yelled at the kid. And he was like 100 push-ups. So the kid like stopped. He got down in line. He did like 5 or 6. And then he thought the coach wasn't looking. So he was just going to go back and like get back in line and keep doing the warm up. Coach saw him stand back up, grabbed him by the back of the collar, yanked him over to his desk, put him down, and he made him do push-ups for the rest of practice. I was like 7. I was scared. I was like, uh-oh, don't mess up. Don't mess up.
Yeah, I've had instructors.
Sure
like
enough,
that.
man.
We are learning. We are learning, from talking to Jimmy and his story, and Jimmy Pedro and Steve Cohen and a few others, that harsh regime it was or it still is part of judo culture, if you will.
Yeah.
Have you experienced that throughout your judo career?
Yep. It exists everywhere in the world.
Why do you think that surfaces and then we can leap into, jiu-jitsu is like complete opposite of all of this, where that structure almost doesn't exist. It's not even, we don't even talk about it.
I'm not 100% sure why it's there. But from a value standpoint, it helps young kids like focus, pay attention, understand hierarchy in a room, understand who to listen to, who not to listen to. And it keeps kids in line. There's a reason why the military does that through boot camp. I'm sure they've spent millions of dollars running through psychologists to figure out that like yelling and pushing people and being harsh gets a certain order to the room. I know I use it today with the kids that I coach that are 13, 14, 15 years old. I even have a stick I walk around with and I'll hit them with it.
You've got the bamboo stick?
Mine's actually a foam padded one. Okay. It's like it's for like sword fighting in the park. You can buy it on Amazon for like $20.
Yeah.
So it's not Big Jim's old bamboo stick.
It's actually, I use that one upstairs when they're doing randori.
Okay. There you go. The truth comes out. Yeah, Jimmy shared that story with us about the bamboo stick. So it's interesting that got passed on.
There's just so many like little nuances with judo, from like people being a half inch taller, half inch shorter, a little bit taller, like foot position, that the more mistakes you make, the longer it's going to take. So you have to like nip it right in the bud when they're younger. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, their careers are flushed down the toilet. They can't do it.
So you say careers, and so is the goal for every young individual to turn this hobby, because at that point that's what it is, into a long life career and potentially, achieve a success as you have at Olympics and world stage?
You would think that there would be 2 paths. There would be the path for like the recreational person who just loves the benefits of the sport and tries to excel to the best of their ability, right? And then they can go on and open up their own schools, kind of like the jiu-jitsu model. The jiu-jitsu model is not really made for producing champions. It's made to produce a lot of people at a somewhat high level and then grow the sport. That's really the mindset of jiu-jitsu. Judo flips that on its head, and it's like, I don't care about anybody that's not trying to achieve that goal or can help others achieve that goal.
Do you think that's one of the reasons why judo is fading away in a sense? Everybody we talked to, and I'm actually curious, before you answer that, I'm actually curious what your thoughts are on this. Everybody we've spoken so far, they essentially say that over time there was a pattern of judo declining and in a sense disappearing from what people know and just as a sport. What are your thoughts on that?
You can attribute, in my own personal opinion, you can attribute the decline of judo to the everybody gets a trophy mentality. So the more that happened, the more judo declined. Right?
So it's not that the harsh regime. You're saying that the fact that everybody else gets a participation trophy or participation ribbon kind of devalues the judo.
Yeah. Because what judo does is, and it's in all sports, right? Like from soccer to softball to hockey to whatever, they all start in these rec leagues, so to speak, like these metro park leagues, which is just how I got started in judo, right? Where you take 10 kids that they want to play some soccer, they get a dad to coach them, and they play for fun. There's like a random kid for a referee. But at that exact same age level, there's a competitive group that parents will pay for because they feel like their kids are superstars, and they're called traveling teams. And then those teams actually travel within the state, region, or even country, depending on the age group, that compete. And what judo doesn't have is that Metro Parks League. It just doesn't exist. You have to be willing to travel, and there's zero segmentation in the room between the guys that are trying to be national champion, the guys that are trying to be Olympic champion, versus just the everyday dad.
So one would think that actually is going to create a platform that these casual guys are going to have to step up, or they will essentially fall off. They will
Correct.
no
and
longer
that's
have
why
interest.
Judo, when you stick in it, you'll get good just by existing. In a quality room, you're just going to get good. But what happens is the best people don't necessarily stick around, because when you excel at something and then you start dropping off, you might as well just hang it up and be gone, because everybody's coming for you, right? And as people get older, you don't see in judo a turnaround. It's almost like wrestling, where are all the NCAA All-Americans? They're working their jobs, they're done with wrestling, they talk about it, but they don't continue to wrestle. Some of them do high school, some of them do middle school, but the sheer number is just out of the sport entirely.
But why?
Because there's no outlet. Wrestling is a lot like judo too, where it's like, no, you compete. There's no like fun. That doesn't exist in the sport of wrestling.
But wouldn't that be so? I'm playing devil's advocate now, but wouldn't that be one of the primary reasons why judo is actually fading away and at some point might be gone completely? Because there is we are not nurturing that kid friendly or the
100%
hobbyist platform, which is probably a majority of people. I mean, not everybody is or going to be a world champion.
100%.
So why isn't somebody not changing this?
And
I'm putting you on a spot here, but this is so interesting to me.
Without mentioning names, there are a lot of dumb people in judo, just in the community of judo. Just, like we could sit here and we could talk about, how to grow this, how to do that, but without actually having like an idea or a plan or an understanding of the steps necessary to get to point B, right? Because we're at point A right now.
Right.
It's like when athletes come to me and they're like, I want to go to the Olympics. Okay. Anybody can go to the Olympics. That's easy. Winning the Olympics is a little bit different, but going, no problem. Super easy to do. But they don't understand that when they make that statement, they've signed away like 8 hours of their day, 6 days a week for 10 years. They don't comprehend what that means.
What it takes to get to the level.
Correct. And they also don't understand where they are today and where they need to be. right?
Yeah, they're not already on the path, you mean? Or like where they should be chronologically?
They assume they are, right? But they actually have no recollection of what that means, right? They haven't been on the world stage. They haven't been to Russia, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan to like see what these other countries are doing and what the level of competition is. You know, in sports like jiu-jitsu and judo, it's weird to be in other countries where like their athletes can't walk down the street. You know, it's hard. They're treated like NBA stars in other countries.
Mm-hmm. Is it?
But
Do you think it's an unwillingness to change in judo? Like they won't adapt and have that rec league, so to speak, to make it more fun for people, to bring people in to keep the sport growing?
I think a lot of people take the easy route when it comes to trying to solve the problem of why is judo failing. They look at a sport like wrestling and they're like, oh, wrestling's a lot like us, right? It's competitive driven, it's Olympic focused. They're like, we got to get judo in all the colleges. They're like, we got to get it in the school system. But they don't fathom the idea that we don't have enough participants to put, if we took all of our white belts, I don't care what age level, you could take a 4-year-old all the way up to a 90-year-old, white through black, white through red belt, I don't care. You couldn't fill the school systems in America.
Right.
You just couldn't do it. So when you hear people at like the higher levels of like in control of USA Judo talking about we need to be in the school systems, we need to be in the colleges, it's like, who would teach it?
Right. Yeah.
Who would run it? But they can't get out of this mentality of like, well, let's just do what wrestling did and we'll be okay. They don't understand that you can't just look at a different business model, take it, put it into yours and go, I'm just as successful. Like the mentality of the players are different. The culture is different. The cost of the sport is different. Wrestling is a lot cheaper to do than judo, right? I got to buy $150 gi, a belt. In wrestling, I can wear any t-shirt I want, any pair of shorts I want, and I can put on a pair of shoes. No problem. Mm-hmm. Right?
It's definitely challenging and interesting topic as all of this is unfolding. So how in the world are you becoming one of the most successful judokas in this country? What did it take for you to achieve the level that you have?
I was fortunate enough. I don't want to say lucky. The word fortunate probably suits better. You could call it lucky, but I had a lot of turning points in my life where, you know, a lot of people probably would have just not paid attention to it, washed it away, not thought about it. I saw it and I used it to its fullest advantage, right? A big one was my first coach allowed me to train at other schools. That was the first one. And that is like unheard of.
That's frowned upon.
Yeah. And so even today, you'll get some coaches that get like a 10-year-old. They try to hold on to that kid until they're 27 and then ride that kid to the Olympics. Meanwhile, he's never been on the international stage. He doesn't know anything about international coaching. He doesn't know how to read, you know, players. He doesn't know how to analyze video, but his kid is kind of talented. So he holds that kid close, doesn't let him go anywhere, and then tries to take him to that next level. My coach was the other way and was like, I've gotten you to where I am. It's like, it's up to you now to go get some knowledge and then come back and I can help you discuss it, but you need more than what's in this room. And I'm not willing to just, you know, try to expand with you.
Yeah.
He knows he couldn't keep up.
We talked about this on the previous episodes where the comparison was made to, you know, education system. You don't have one teacher from first grade to the 8th grade. You actually, you have some for a few grades, but then at some point the student is getting passed on simply because a teacher doesn't have the capability of teaching a high school math, you know, or, you know, another child who is in 4th grade. The material is different, right? And the skill sets are different. And I think passing on the student to make them successful is so important. But not only that, but I think also cross-training, getting the perspective of other people learning from other people is so critical if you're seeking to be on the highest level, in the world, or whatever stage you're looking at.
Yep. It's a lot like wrestling too, right? Where you have elementary coaches, middle school coaches, high school coaches, college coaches, national coaches. What are they? NTCs now, they're national training centers. They have their own coaches where they pride themselves on being the best in their lane.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have that in jiu-jitsu. You don't have that in judo. You don't really have that in any martial arts. They try to hold and contain all these people instead of saying, you know what? I'm the best kids coach in the world. I'm the best 12, 13-year-old coach in the world. I'm the best junior coach in the world. And they don't want to take that on as their responsibility. Everybody wants to be the captain of the ship, and nobody really wants to pride themselves on, look, I'm doing my job. I'm pushing all these kids to you, and you're not doing anything with them.
So at which point you meet Jimmy Padron?
I met Jimmy for the first time when I was a kid, and he was teaching a camp in Oregon that we had attended. And it was like a 4-day, overnight stay at a college. And then I ran into him again. It must have been 2006, maybe. Yeah, 2006, 2007.
So a couple years before your Olympics.
Yeah, a couple years before. He was in charge of the under-23 team. That was it was really, we have that program in judo because when you hit the age of 20, you're considered an adult. But when somebody's been on the circuit for 7 years, 8 years, even 4 years, there's a gap in skill where you have a transitional period. And it's what the rest of the world has really professionalized they understand that when you're trying to winning is a learned trait. It doesn't just happen because you work hard in the room. You have to learn how to win. And that goes above and beyond technique. That goes above and beyond coaching. It's an actual understanding and a belief within yourself that I'm supposed to win. Not I can win, I'm supposed to. There's a huge mental shift. So when you have an athlete that is being successful, right? Let's say you had a 13-year-old athlete that was competing in IBJJF judo, it didn't matter, and they became national champion. But when they hit 14, do they go into that next tier as a kid? Right? What Europe does is they say, hey, you moved into you're 14 now, but your age bracket goes to 17. There is no way as a 14-year-old, you're going to compete with a 17-year-old that's been competing on the tour and professionally over the last few years. What we're going to do is we're going to keep you home. We're going to train you. We're going to travel. We're going to go to all these camps, clinics. You're going to get your hands on these guys. And then when you're ready, we're going to compete. That way that kid doesn't experience losing and get comfortable with it. They keep them on that winning platform and they protect them as a nation, as coaches, as parents, so that they only understand success. And when somebody only understands that success, they are super hard to beat.
So it seems to me like it's a mechanism to essentially create this strategy for these guys, for these individuals, guys and girls, to be specifically trained to win. So it's not the skill set, it's not only the mindset, but it's the whole vehicle.
Yep. It's a belief in the system, from belief in the coach, belief in your training partners, your parents, the country, all of it. You have to believe in that organism functions for the sole purpose of you winning medals.
That has to be really difficult from the participant perspective, that you believe in this and you don't see it yet, and they will carry you. So I'm trying to visualize this from even Olympic level, right? I mean, you are a teen or maybe a young individual and you're going through these stages and you're being told the entire time you need to believe, just believe you got this, believe, continue working hard and it will happen.
Well, that's because we as the United States, we don't operate as a unit. We operate as individuals.
Mm-hmm.
So when you take two individuals, let's say you had a room of 20 people and y'all trained together. But what happens when only 2 of them win? But they all did the same thing. It's like, who really worked hard? What's that other factor that is missing? And a lot of it has to do with the mental side of it, where you're naysaying the person next to you. You feel like the practice wasn't meant for you. You felt like you didn't get enough time. All you're doing is being negative within the training sessions instead of outlooking and trying to be positive and focusing on your own goals and your own ideas and your own problems, right? And when you spend a lot of your time being negative, when it comes time to be positive, you haven't really practiced, right? That positive mindset and that positive outlook, because you feel like you're being left behind. But what a lot of countries do, because they work as a unit, is when you've been benched, let's say that 14-year-old has been benched, right? Or that 18-year-old that's supposed to compete at juniors has been benched because there's somebody that's 20 that's about to go win the worlds. They're on that same journey, right? It's like being on an escalator. Well, when that guy in front of you 2 rows up is winning the worlds and you're benched, you understand that like this path that they have laid out for you is going towards success, right? So now you can see where you need to go. You can see who you need to beat. You can see how the Olympic level athletes are training.
And you probably understand the fact that the person who is winning all these titles or these events, they've probably been benched just like you are being benched at this moment. It just happened a couple years back. So this is a natural progression of the system.
Yep. Because they understand that when they were 14, they watched that 18-year-old not go. And they watched that other guy win. And then 2 years later, when they got benched, they see that guy get put in. And then they see him win the worlds, and it's like, I understand. And they feel a part of this life cycle where it's like, we are beating the rest of the world, right? When you go to France, when you go to Germany, when you go to these other places, you see the athletes like communicating and discussing and troubleshooting like other players, because they don't care which 66 kilo guy wins. They are both trying to beat the Japanese, right? It's about us versus them. And that's the one thing that we don't have in this country, that if you really wanted to grow the sport, you'd have to get that organism in lockdown so that you could start those feeder programs, so that you could start getting coaches to understand, hey, you know what you're really good at? You're really good at getting people in the door. I don't even care what happens at 16 years old. Doesn't even matter. I want you to kind of ignore them. They can exist in your dojo. They can pay dues. They can help out. But 80% of your time and focus is getting kids and young adults into the door, because I want you to have a school of 500 people. I want you to make 6 figures. And I want you to push those kids that you feel can go to that next level to that regional place right next to you. Right? Yeah, but that's not the mentality.
Right.
They don't want to win.
Everybody, well, there's a lot of selfishness, right? I think plays into it, right? Instead of selflessness. Is that that's what I'm trying to say. Where, but it's more of a, we're very focused here on the individual and me and what am I going to take home, or what is my kid benefiting from this, instead of looking around and seeing it as a team, right? As a whole. It's more about the individual.
A lot of it has to do with the lack of trust to that next level, because that organism doesn't exist where it's like, who's going to take care of my kid? I've just put 7 years of my personal life 3 to 4 times a day, a couple hours a day into this child. Who do you trust to take him on? And without that organism, why would they ever send him there? Like, how could you do this better? If it's not your day job to focus on a 17-year-old kid, and that's not what you do for a living, why would I ever send him? It's a hard question to ask.
It sounds like a vicious circle.
It is. And that's the problem with judo, is they don't look at like themselves and like the system that they have and try to fix it. They look at like the overall picture of, we need to get in the school systems, we need to get in the colleges, but they don't fix the internal workings of the structure so that they can scale to eventually be in YMCAs, to be in, all the, even high schools. An easy one to take on for judo would be private schools. They can afford it, and there's not that many of them. So you could find regions of private schools where you could get coaches involved to actually start building a school system program.
Started on a smaller scale and
That's
work your way
interesting.
up. Yeah.
But it's all useless until you fix that inner workings of the structure. It's just like anything in business. If all your processes are broken, when you scale, you're just going to fail. People are going to riot. You're not going to be able to afford it, and you're going to go bankrupt.
Yeah, that's the interesting part. That it seems like this entire thing is so much bigger than what it appears to be. That more we are talking about this, more complex this is looking.
Yeah.
So let's go back to you. You meet Jimmy, and at which point in your head you're going to Olympics? Because it seems to me like that seed needs to be planted very early on. Or do you even know you're going to go to Olympics way before you meet Jimmy?
It was a goal well before I ever met him. So it must have been 96 Olympics. We were in my living room watching it. And I remember seeing some of the medal stands, and I was like, that's what I want to do. That's where I want to be. And then shortly thereafter, I suffered a catastrophic knee injury. I couldn't play sports for like 4 years.
Mm-hmm.
And I was at home one day, just with my leg elevated because it was throbbing. And I was like 1 o'clock in the morning, and I threw in an old VHS tape of me doing judo for whatever reason. And I saw it. And I saw how happy my family was. I saw how happy I was. I saw myself winning, and I was like, let's do this. Let's go back. And then spoke to my mother the next day, started going to judo twice a week.
How old are you then?
I must have been like 16, 17 years old.
So you're teen. Okay. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And then once school came back, I was like, I'm going to go to the Olympics. That's going to be my sole focus. And so I spent the summer doing judo recreationally. And then once school started my junior year, that was it. I was going to the Olympics.
So how do you go from training twice a week to 4 years later? You're there. How does that progress?
Probably a lot of things I would suggest no kids ever do. Like I made it a point to walk to school to and from every day. It was a 2.5 mile walk. Didn't take the bus, didn't accept rides. I was like, this is part of my, I'm working out right now. I was fortunate enough to my gym instructor where I could sign up for weightlifting. He was actually a D1 strength and conditioning coach for college that actually worked at my high school because his daughter wanted him to come coach the basketball team. So he quit his 6-figure salary at a D1 school to go to a local high school because he wanted to support his daughter. And I used that to my advantage, strength training specifically for judo, right? I didn't power lift. I didn't do anything. I explained to him what judo was. I showed him some matches, and he wrote me a program specifically on doing judo.
Wow. That's great.
And then I used to have to take a study hall course, which is like a 1 hour, do your work class. It's used for kids in sports. So I basically took my 6th period and moved it to my study hall so that when 5th period hit at 1 o'clock, I could skate or run 1.5 miles to a bus stop to take a 1 hour bus ride to a high school down the road. And then I would practice judo because they had it in their after school program. And then my mother would pick me up there from work, and then she would drive me to the night session 1.5 hours away on the complete opposite side of the state. And then I would drive home. So I would do 3 practices there. I would do 2 practices in Seattle, living in Tacoma, which is a 45-minute drive. And then on weekends, I would drive all the way up to British Columbia, crossing the Canadian border, because they would have Saturday and Sunday practices as a region. And they had a lot of really good judo players.
Who organizes all of this? I'm listening to you, and you're 16 years old at that point.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know one 16-year-old who would say, first of all, I don't know one 16-year-old who would say, I'm going to go to Olympics. This is going to be my goal. I'm going to do anything that it takes. And beyond that, you're walking to school every day. You remove a bus or any type of transportation because you want to have a workout. You restructure your entire school day where you make periods available so you have a midday workout. You find a way to find a coach, a weightlifting coach who can actually provide you the knowledge that you need so you get stronger. I'm sorry, but I don't know one 16-year-old who would do it. What's going on?
I was about 17 at the time.
Fine, 17. So, I don't know one 17-year-old who would do it. I don't know adults who would do it.
Yeah, there were some nights where like I was sleeping at like people's houses that were, you know, they were like people at the club. It was like, no, I'll just stay with you that night and then I'll wake up at 5:30 and then I'll just drive to school the next morning. I won't even go home. Like I was sleeping at my grandparents' house in Tacoma, and my mom lived in Auburn, and then I was sleeping in places in Seattle like every night of the week, but going to school in Auburn every morning. And each one was about a 45-minute drive in opposite directions, plus training in Canada and with Marty Malloy on Sundays, some weekends, which is Whidbey Island, which is like a 2.5 hour drive. You know, I would do things like I would call up my friends and be like, hey, do you think your parents could let me borrow their car? I really need to get to practice today. But they didn't know practice was 2 hours away. So I would find friends that had full gas tanks and I would just borrow their car because I didn't have gas. I couldn't afford it. So I'd be calling people to like, you know, find cars and then return them empty. And they'd be like, where'd you go? And I was like, oh, I drove to Canada.
How long is this going for?
That went until probably my senior year. And then once I graduated, I started roofing houses. So I was waking up every day at 5 a.m. and then roofing until like 3 to 5 p.m. depending on the house to make $100 a day. And then going to practices at night and then lifting at night after judo sessions.
And then back up again at 5.
Yeah. And that lasted till about, I would say about 6 to 8 months. And then we moved to San Jose. Me and Marty Malloy decided to pick up and move to San Jose full time.
So at which point your training turns, maybe serious is not the word here, but you know what I mean by it. More professional, let's just put it that way. At which point you pivot your training from this duct taping idea of I'm going to figure things out to more of a professional approach. And I assume that Jimmy has a lot to do with this, but my assumption is, you tell me.
It probably didn't happen until 2010, 2011. So I went from like 2003 to like 2011, like completely like just piecing my training together, like 100%, like we're just going to make this up as we go.
So your 2008 Olympics are outside of that time frame.
Correct.
Wait a minute. Rewind. So how do you get to 2008 Olympics then?
Fortunately for me, the qualification was a lot easier than, you know, what kids are going through today. At the time, you had to be top 5 within the Pan Am Union, right? So that includes countries like Cuba, Mexico, Uruguay, Paraguay, Dominican Republic, US, Canada, basically North, Central, and South America. You had to be top 5 in. But the divisions are only like 15 deep, but you had to be top 5. And what happened was at the world stage, the year before the Olympics, the top 5 people at the world got an automatic card in. And you used to qualify the country back then. So if Brazil took a top 5, they were one person off the Pan Am list and you still got 5. Right. Okay. So it would technically be top 6.
Yeah.
Because they didn't just take a slot. They would just be completely removed as a country. So I was fortunate enough to qualify the US as the number 1 slot for Pan Ams. And then I ended up winning the Olympic trials in 2008.
How was that experience?
It was probably one of the most exciting times because it was in front of a big crowd. It was the first time like judo was like kind of in front of like other grapplers, because it was judo and wrestling trials were together.
Oh,
okay.
Yeah. So wrestling had 2 mats and judo had 1, just because of the sheer number of people competing. But the arena was packed.
That's a huge exposure for judo.
What was that?
That's a huge exposure for judo.
Correct. And that's why winning it was such a big thing, because wrestlers understood the grind, right? Like when you're in front of like rowers or bobsledders, like they don't understand that like grind of like that physicality of like you and another human going at it for years, and the toll it takes for you to make it to the top. But they got it, so they appreciated what they were seeing. They might not have understood the rules and everything that was going on, but they appreciated it.
So at this point, do you have a sense of accomplishment? I mean, this is something that you've been dreaming about for years at this point, or decades more. I mean, it's been kind of embedded, and you are on this at this point, a pivotal point of being at Olympic trials, and things are going well. You know, result of it, it's pretty clear. You know, what's going through your head as all of this is unfolding?
I was so excited. I was so happy. I thought I had made it. I thought like I had reached like the top of the world, right? But looking back on it, it's one of the things that USA Judo did really poorly, was they don't educate athletes on goals. They don't educate athletes on the system. They don't educate athletes to grow them to success. They just expect them to be there and start winning. And young athletes, they really have to go through this transitional period in their minds where they don't dream of success. They don't set a goal for success. They actually anticipate success, right? There's a completely different mental shift when you anticipate something versus when you hope something happens, right? And it's like looking back on it, it's like, why was I so happy that I had qualified for the Olympic Games? Because I hadn't actually anticipated the idea that this was happening. There was no like guarantee for me in my mind. I hadn't actually thought about it that, no, I'm going. Like I never actually took a step back and looked at like myself in the United States going, yeah, I've lost 2 matches in 3 years. How do I lose 2 matches in a day when I can only lose 2 matches in 3 years? I'm going to the Olympics. But I never made that mental shift. So what happened was when you qualified for the Olympics and you won this big stage, it was like a giant party. It was like a big eruption, right? Where like in your head, you're just so happy, you're so excited. But you have the Olympics coming up in 2 months.
What you're saying essentially that this should not be a celebration point. This is just a beginning.
But it should have been like a stepping stone. Like how, like your goal was winning the Olympics. Why are you so thrilled about qualifying? It's like, you should have anticipated that. How did you not foresee yourself actually qualifying for the games if you planned on winning it?
Right.
There's those little stepping stones that you have to get kids and young athletes and, you know, people to understand that these milestones, you have to believe it before you achieve it. Right? Like you have to understand that like, oh, that was supposed to happen. Why is everybody so like excited about this? And once I realized that looking back, that's what made 2012 and 2016 super easy.
So give us a comparison. Sorry, Gary. Give us a comparison between the 2008 and 2012 and 16. What was the differences? What was your mindset? What were you going through to make that drastic difference?
In getting ready for 2008 Olympics, we had spent 2007 and the first half of 2008 training for the Olympic trials. Well, then who trained for the Olympics? In 2012, we spent the year and a half before training for the Olympic Games. We understood that like, I'm going to the Olympic Games. We don't know where I'm going to be seated, but I'm going. Okay. So now how do we win? Right? We could make that mental change of like, I'm not worried about not going. Right? Like, yeah, I could get hit by a car, I could trip, I could get injured, but for the most part, like, I'm going. So now let's take this next year and a half and focus on how do we win it? And that's a huge mental change.
Mm-hmm.
Because when you go through the process of deciding how you're going to win it and then you train it into your system, now you start to believe you can, because you've come up with a plan, you've trained the plan into your system, and you're like, oh, I've got this. I've got this. I'm going to win the Olympics because I believe in the plan. I believe in the system that was created to win the Olympic Games.
Yeah, you're talking about fundamental mental shift. You're talking about stop talking about if, you're talking about how. It's not whether you achieve it, is how do we get there? We are not questioning the destination. We're questioning what processes and what steps we're going to introduce to get to the goal that we already know we're going to get there. It's irrelevant.
It's a huge fundamental flaw in the sport of jiu-jitsu, mm-hmm. and even in a lot of judo places, because like you guys both train, right?
Mm-hmm. Oh, absolutely.
How many of you guys have been to World Masters?
Yeah.
Right? Or even like Worlds in general. Did the room ever change? Really?
Nope.
No. So like, what were you really preparing for versus showing up for? Mm-hmm. Right? People just expect results to happen. We were making like actual shifts in our training and how judo was played in order to get the results we desired. It wasn't just about showing up. It wasn't just about working hard. Everybody works hard. Everybody is strong, but who can mentally stick to the plan that is laid out? Because I'm a firm believer in, I can look at anybody in the world, and if I told an athlete to do one thing, they would always win. Because I can find that one thing against anybody that will shut down their entire game. It's just, can the athlete do it? And the question becomes, if you could actually pinpoint on every individual athlete that he would have to fight and say, hey, don't give up this thing and stay over here and you'll win. When you're doing those two things, the athlete just has to figure out how they're going to win within doing those two jobs. And that's where training comes into place, right? Like when I was fighting the Bulgarian in the 2016 Olympics, I had never touched his gi before. Not even a training round in any camp anywhere in the world. And I knew, just based off watching him compete and watching him train, that if I pushed him, he would fall to his back. And I was like, done, game over. That's an easy fight for me. When he beat the Korean, we already wrote him off and I was into the semis. Because we knew, even if he got ahead on the scoreboard, he would panic. He would do a sumi and fall to his back. I would pass his guard and I would pin him. He's conditioned to do it, because he just trains to train. We train to condition our bodies to avoid certain areas while excelling in others. Everybody else just works out for the fun of it, because we try to make those fundamental mental shifts in people's minds where like, no, we actually change the structure and are preparing for set event.
I think what you're talking about, and correct me if I'm wrong, but what I'm hearing from you is that training to submit somebody or training to throw somebody is very different than train to win.
Yes.
Train to win has a very specific and different goal.
Yes.
It doesn't have to be pretty. It doesn't have to be entertaining. It has nothing to do with playing your A game. It has nothing to do with it's finding a way for your hand to go up at the end.
Yep. We knew part of the game plan that we had written a year ago against the Georgian in the semifinal was just don't get thrown in 3 minutes and you'll win in the final minute. Because you can see the Georgian is so used to, if you watch any of his matches and watch them repeatedly, right? Watch like 15 in a row and then intermix those, watch the first 5 where he throws everybody in the first like 3 minutes, but then like cut that in your mind and then watch the last minute of every fight. You will see 2 completely different fighters. They just make these mental shifts where it's like, what were you doing? Why are you fighting over here with so much success? But then the clock hits the final minute and it's like panic sets in, where he makes these fundamental changes where they look like a different fighter. If you go on my YouTube channel, I actually show a match where I'm fighting in Cuba against a Mongolian guy, and he's kicking the crap out of me, all the way up until about the last minute. And something happened where he, instead of fighting to win, he started fighting to try to get to the end of the match. He changed what was working for 3-4 minutes. But why would you change? Something about that clock they haven't trained inside themselves to keep going and keep fighting with success. They inherently, because of how they train, and it tells me that when that kid practices, he actually is a clock watcher. He'll look at the clock and go, oh, I've thrown you twice. You haven't thrown me. I'm just going to win the round. And he makes those like changes up here where he's not practicing to practice. He's practicing to win. But what happens is when he competes, he actually loses because he doesn't know how to win. He can't maintain those leads because he doesn't know how to fight. He just makes these like huge, just tactical errors. And you can expose the entire world for those errors because it's untaught. People don't talk about it.
Yeah, and I think what's brilliant about this entire conversation is the fact that a lot of people don't even know. Well, first of all, a lot of people don't see it. And finding them, identifying them, and then working a process or plan to exploit them. That now you're taking everything to the next level.
Yep. I remember having a conversation with Yarden Jerby when she was filming for Judo Fanatics, and we were talking about this like people, if they just knew how to watch people and like they actually knew what to look for. She was like, the Japanese girl that she beat in Rio, she's like, she throws everybody inside 2.5 minutes. She goes, I was fighting grips, I was fighting positions, I didn't care about Shidos. I just can't get thrown in 2.5 minutes. And then the girl will break. She'll just mentally in her own head, she'll just like, I can't throw this girl, I don't know what to do. Forget the fact that she's been teeing off attacks for 2.5 minutes without any repercussions. Why don't she just keep doing that for the next 2.5 minutes? In her mind, she's just like, she's so trained to do it so quickly that when she can't do it, she lost 80% of her matches if she couldn't score in the first 2.5.
That's mind blowing.
So all she did to beat the Japanese girl was not get thrown in 2.5. And sure enough, 40 seconds later, she threw the Japanese girl.
So interesting. So many people should listen to this. Listen, so
it's just a statistical game, right?
Well, I think what you talk about right now, what you're talking about is introducing a strategic approach to training that people have been doing in other sports for decades. I mean, you look at basketball, you look at soccer, you look at virtually any sport, the strategic approach of picking your partner or you picking your opponent apart and developing a game plan. You're talking about introducing that in judo and in jiu-jitsu.
Yeah, it's super simple to do. It's not that hard. You just have to take, the problem is none of us are professionals. That's not our job.
Yeah.
But what would happen if Andre took his $10 million a year Atos business and he actually hired a stats guy to watch flow and said, hey, I want breakdowns of, hey, how many times does this guy get his guard passed in what minute? What's the percentage there?
Yeah.
He obviously, like, when does he get submitted? And with what, on what arm? By a guy who passes on what side, right? When you could label it down, you could actually say, I don't care what jujitsu you know, I'm going to learn to pass on the left side, do a Kimura on the right side after attacking this specific thing because there's an 80% chance it works against this player. Because he's been submitted 3 times in 5 years, and 3 times were based on this sequence of events.
Yeah, but this is not any different than putting a left-hander to throw a ball when they
already do it.
Right.
They're just playing the odds.
Right.
Yeah.
And if your job is as an athlete to train and perfect and learn, do that job. That's what I was really good at. I was really good at training. I was really good at staying motivated, and I was really good at learning, because that's what I had to do. I had to learn how to fight certain ways against certain players to beat them, just based on like the stats. You have to learn, like when I fight a Japanese player who is left-handed, I fight in very specific areas of a match with very specific gripping sequences because he's a better judo player. The problem is I'm never going to give him the chance to just stand there with two hands and throw me, because I understand how to use the tatami mat and the square to my advantage. I understand how to use the gi to my advantage. I understand how to use the positioning of the ref to my advantage. Right? So all those little things play into a factor of who's going to win at the end of the round.
Because that's all that matters.
That's all that matters.
Do you think that waters down anything for the viewer? Like when you're talking, if you talk about baseball and they're making pitching changes, 3 times, 4 times in an inning, when it comes to something like BJJ or judo, does nothing happen for the first 2.5 minutes, or you think nothing's happening as a viewer for 2.5 minutes, and then that 3rd minute is when somebody makes their move? Does that water it down for the viewer, do you think, at all? Does it matter? Do you care?
I think a better way jiu-jitsu should be played, because right now the way it's played is through who trains harder. It's got nothing to do with like actual strategy, because jiu-jitsu is an isometric sport where you've got to be able to hold tension for long extended periods of time. Right? It's like a 10-minute sprint. And if it's not, it's because both of us have agreed that we're just going to lay here for 30 seconds because we're tired, right? At the end of the day. But what if you took an athlete that was more of like a boxer, where, hey, I'm going to try to pass your guard for the first 2.5 minutes to my right, and I'm going to try all these passes, because then out of nowhere, I'm going to pass to my left. But what if that was the technique? And I think that's what a lot of people don't understand, is like, I will do a lot of things just to condition the response of my partner to get what I want to work, rather than trying to develop a technique and just stay there for so long that you get tired that I call it successful.
I'll take this deeper. So what you're talking about right now is essentially, let me rephrase. A lot of people in the world train jiu-jitsu specifically. I can't speak about judo, but jiu-jitsu specifically, they train to get better. So I train jiu-jitsu. I want to get better. I want to develop my guard so it's unstoppable. Or I want to develop a passing guard strategy so they are unstoppable. I'm going to pass you the way I want to pass. What you talk about is, I want to see what my opponent is doing. I'm going to pick their game apart, and I'm going to pass the one way that he's going to fail, because that's when I succeed. There's a fundamental difference between the way how you think, how you process, how you execute. It's not about me. It's about my partner failing, and as a result, I am winning.
To flip that analogy, in case people didn't understand it, think about it like this, and this is my approach. No matter what, there is a counter for everything. Right? Great. That means, and I tell my students all the time, I go, I make mistakes all the time. You guys are just too stupid to catch them. That's not my fault. It's just you guys, and most people, they're like, I knee cut. Well, why'd you label yourself into this hole of like being so predictable that it's easy to stop? Because everything has a counter. So if you're going to label yourself into this one lane and say, oh, I'm just going to get so good at this, nobody can stop it. Whereas my mentality is, I'm going to get good at a lot of different things, because you will leave that hole open. I just have to be talented enough to see it. And that's where people struggle, is because when they get tired, they stop thinking. When I get tired, I actually process more information. That's just because of how I've learned.
Now you're talking about something completely, you're taking this conversation to the next level, not only conditioning, but processing information while exhausted, and how you strategically approach that entire, which I think in jiu-jitsu specifically, a lot of people fail flat out
Yep.
fail. They get tired and they stop moving, they stop thinking, they stop making intelligent decisions versus using that advantage to their own benefit.
I remember I was in Brazil after Copa Podio and I was training with Gordo, and he introduced me to chess jiu-jitsu. And basically what I did with one of his black belts was we started in open guard. I started on my butt and he started passing, and we each made one fundamental move at a time. And we could think about it for as long as we wanted. We just stayed there because it actually boiled down to, do you actually know what to do? Because when I watch techniques on Instagram, when I watch techniques on YouTube, and people come to me and they're like, what do you think of this? And every time I'm like, you're full of shit, because you're not following the core basic principles of what makes a technique sound. It has to be move for move, and it has to still work. And all the moves, just like chess, they have to be conditions your partner has to make. Mm-hmm. Right? Like if I go knee cut, but you go underhook, what happens? The entire world of what we know is changed based on one grip. So you can't just say, I do this one thing. So when you're thinking about the techniques that you need to know, think about like, did I actually move two objects before my opponent has done anything? Like you think about Keenan, like setting up worm guard, and you're like, that's ludicrous to me. How did that ever happen? Where he had the audacity to take the collar out, put his foot on the hips, turn your body, pass it through the legs, make another grip switch, and your partner's done absolutely nothing about it. Just think about that fundamental flaw and how much that other guy sucks. That he moved 5 times before you did. It's just a personal choice where like you didn't know as an athlete, and this is why you suck. You actually didn't know what to fight for. That's that fundamental flaw where it's like you actually, with everything going on in the world and everything going on within the match, you don't know what the fight is about.
Yeah, no, it's so interesting topic in my opinion, because it's a lot of people view the jiu-jitsu escapes or jiu-jitsu counters or jiu-jitsu response, let's just put it that way, based on what am I going to do if he does that? Meaning, let's say I'm in the bottom. Oh, fine. Let's take Keenan's approach. The worm guard is coming in, and the typical question is, well, how do I escape the worm guard? Or how do I stop the worm guard? Versus, what do I do when the first grip takes place?
Yes.
Because you address the first grip and everything else is gone. There's no more. I addressed it. I responded to it in the proper way at the proper time.
You should never, people always try to attribute jiu-jitsu and judo to these like very like down the rabbit hole theories, right? And I try to tell all of my students and everybody I always talk to, I go, never be more than 2 or 3 steps ahead of your partner. Never, under any circumstances, because if you're thinking that far ahead, you're not present in the moment.
You're not seeing what's ahead of you. Yeah, immediately
right?
in front of you. Yeah.
You have to be right here, right now, because whether he puts his foot on the bicep or on the hip, your world has changed. Whether he grabs your sleeve or your collar, the world has changed. If he's cupping your ankle versus grabbing your pant leg, the world is different. They each one requires different responses because the mobility and the actions are different. And you have to understand what the fight is about and where you can go from there. Because with every action, there's only so many possibilities. And only some of them are good for you. And the ones that are good for you may be different than me based on our own strength, our own athleticism, or our own styles of how we like doing jiu-jitsu. And that's where people really struggle, is they try to go 4 steps ahead into, oh, I'm going to knee cut pass. And it's like, but now you're not defending your collars and you're not defending the hooks. And Keenan's going to set that guard. Great. Well done. You really thought that one through. Right? Like, it's just like, I don't understand what you were thinking. And it's because they just thought they were going to do better than the last guy. It's an actual threat because all Keenan did was said, hey, you guys ignore all of this stuff all the time and you just stick to your plans. I'm going to throw this like random thing in here and then see what happens. And nobody decided to address it until they get in there and then they try to problem solve.
Well, listen, the same thing happened with spider guard. Same thing happened with half guard. Same thing. I mean, every concept in jiu-jitsu specifically, it encounters it. Somebody finds a loophole, they find a way how to do it, and then over time, people pick it apart and say, well, you can't do De La Hiva because I'm going to do this first, and it's done, and it's over. And the same, again, it's over and over and over. But it all boils down to what you talk about. It's not reacting. It's being a proactive approach to how to address the situation. And you can't be more than 2-3 steps ahead, because then you're not seeing what's happening right now.
Yep. Because there's all these like micro shifts within the sport. Even with judo, there's micro shift between the different pressures, between my elbow being down, my elbow being up. Is my hand pulling? Is my hand pushing? Right? Because this is different than that in judo. They all require different responses.
Absolutely. Listen, you talk about jiu-jitsu quite a bit, and you received your black belt from John Danaher. What made you make that switch from judo to jiu-jitsu? Or maybe it wasn't a switch. Maybe it was an addition.
Yeah, it wasn't a switch. It was more of a, I needed a way to train. And so in February of 2012, I threw a guy into a metal chair because I was frustrated at a tournament. And I ended up with a Liz Frank fracture in my foot. So I couldn't do judo anymore. I tried for, I want to say it was like 5 weeks. I tried, and it kept getting dinged, and I was done. So I had a meeting with Jimmy, and I was like, I got to keep training. Maybe I should go down to Henzo's and do jiu-jitsu, because at least I can sit on my butt, right? At least I can do that. And it'll at least keep my grip strong. It'll keep me motivated. I'll keep my weight down because I'll be sweating. And he was like, okay, let me call Henzo. He called Henzo. Henzo said, no problem. Come to this class. Didn't even know who John was. Had no idea. And I ended up showing up to the class, and I took the class. And after the class, I met with John, and he was like, what are you doing? And I go, I'm training. And he goes, oh, so you do judo? Because he knew who I was. I didn't know who he was, because he actually studies YouTube and all these other martial arts. So he knows a lot of people. And I told him, I was like, I don't want you to teach me as if I'm a judo player. Teach me jiu-jitsu. Because if he tries to teach me how to do judo, it's not going to work. I'm gonna shut down because he doesn't know judo. Mm-hmm. Not the way I do. Mm-hmm. I go, every time he tries to problem solve for me, I'm going to say, but that's not going to work because of this. Because I'm going to do this, you're going to do that, and then the ref's going to stop us because that's the way it is. But if he teaches me jiu-jitsu at its purest form, just teach me jiu-jitsu, I have the intelligence to take that knowledge and apply it to judo. Right? And that's the problem that a lot of jiu-jitsu people have, is they go to judo and then they try to get the coaches to teach them for jiu-jitsu. And they fail, because that's not what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to take the art as a whole. Like when I wrestle. I don't do judo. I don't do chimadas. I don't do taios. I don't do ochis. I wrestle. I take shots. I shoot sweep singles, low singles, underhooks, overhooks. They're all different. And then once you at a high enough level, you can go to other sports and then pick for individual circumstances how to improve. So when I went to jiu-jitsu, that was really the mentality, was like, I just want to get good at jiu-jitsu. That was it. That's all I care about.
That mental shift has to be difficult. I went the other way. I mean, I've been doing jiu-jitsu for 20 years, and I started exploring judo some few years back, and it's that mental shift of, and I agree with you 100%. You can't do judo for jiu-jitsu, or judo or jiu-jitsu for judo, whichever way. It has to be, you put everything aside that you've learned so far, and you becoming a brand new student trying to receive the information. And if you're intelligent enough, if you're smart enough, you can translate and pick and connect the dots on your own.
Yeah. It's a hard shift for a lot of people, because they're not experts in learning. They're experts in projecting information. And when you look at people from like a knowledge standpoint, when they're learning jiu-jitsu, when they're learning how to wrestle, when they're learning how to do anything, they always come into that environment with something. Mm-hmm. Right? I don't care who you are. I do it, you do it, it doesn't matter, right? Think about your first round in jiu-jitsu. What was shown to you versus what you did. Mm-hmm. You took your own like interpretation of what was good and what was bad with a complete uncertainty into, I'm just going to try to make this work. And then you take all of your intuition and you throw it into that sport. And once you've done that, you've tainted it. Mm-hmm. What I am very good at and why I excel so quickly is because I don't do that anymore. I used to, but once I realized it, I don't do that. I would rather start at the very base. I don't care if you're a black belt, a purple belt, if you're a world champion, doesn't matter to me. If you're afraid of admitting that you need to start at the base, you suck. You've limited your ceiling of growth so far, right? Because their fear is like, oh, I'm above that. That's not for me. But when I start there, I actually get through all the stages of learning so much quicker. Because I don't try to implement what I already know and how to already do things into this system, which will actually cause it to never work.
You're essentially setting us up for failure from the very beginning by correcting.
From the very beginning, and you never even knew you did it.
Yep. Yeah.
Right? It's like, how many of us have ever seen wrestlers from high school come into jiu-jitsu and then they go belly down? Mm-hmm. Like, you're telling me you don't have the discipline as a trained athlete to just not do that? I do.
Yeah. Yeah.
But most people don't. They have to put their own beliefs into it and conditions.
Yeah. I mean, especially with cross training between wrestling, jiu-jitsu and judo, you have everybody has their own strong point, especially if you've done one of the disciplines for a very, very long time. And I don't know about you, but most people hate losing. And I think that's big factor behind all of this is the fact that, go ahead.
I'm so glad you said that, because you can't win and lose.
Well, I know. And that's what's mind blowing about all of this, right? Because how do you define winning? For one person is going to be winning that one match. For me, it's going to be learning all these three disciplines and being so good at it that I can make intelligent decisions when I find myself in these situations. I don't care about this one match. I don't care about this one thing. Fine. I don't know wrestling. Okay, pin me down. I don't know judo. Fine, throw me. But if that means over the next few years, I'm going to master this art from very beginning to the very end, my goal in 5 years to be so good at it that you can't touch me.
I was actually, when I was getting ready for 2012, I was doing 2 jiu-jitsu workouts a day, a full-blown wrestling workout, and 2 judo workouts a day, plus strength training, all in one day, 5 days a week.
Did you sleep?
Because I can systematically go from one sport to another without bringing one sport to another.
Yeah, and I think that's the fundamental difference between people who find themselves successful and people who, mud their waters and trying to introduce the previous skills to what they are trying to learn. And unfortunately, they are stopping themselves.
I think for people who are listening to this, a way of thinking about it that they might understand a little bit better is if they work in the professional world, like in business, in restaurants, doesn't matter. And all of a sudden, like, let's say you've been working at your job for 5 or 6 years, right? And you understand the hierarchy, you understand the flow, you understand whatever. How annoying is it for that new guy that gets hired to come into the team and then tell you why the other job they had did things better? Think about that. Yeah, right? Everybody's been there. It's like, but that's not how it works here. Stop talking about it. And how about you focus on trying to learn these processes so that we can get better collectively as a whole, because this is how we do it over here. Mm-hmm. And then people understand that, but then they go into like the martial arts realm and they're like, but I'm going to wrestle at jiu-jitsu.
Right.
And it's like, what are we doing? You're doing what that guy did in the professional world. You just walked into a brand new facility and said, but this is how we do it.
Yep.
And it's like, you can't You can't do that. And once you learn how not to, it helps in all aspects of life.
I love this. This is so insightful. I think everybody should really listen to this because it fundamentally outlines the educational system. Essentially, you shouldn't take math to language. You shouldn't take language to math. You learn them separately. And this is we are talking about different disciplines. We are talking about different languages in a way, with different goals. We didn't even touch that part. That goal in judo is very different than goal in jiu-jitsu. Goal in jiu-jitsu is very different than goal in wrestling. I mean, they are black and white. They are not even close.
Yep.
So you play a different game by different rules with a different goal. Why would you intermax them? What, like, that doesn't.
And
make
I think
sense.
when people do jiu-jitsu with me, they're actually shocked because their experience with doing jiu-jitsu with judo players is a very fast, very aggressive, explosive style. And it's like, I'm the opposite. Like, I don't believe in takedowns for jiu-jitsu. I believe in pulling guard and playing from bottom and getting underneath people and playing from lassos and going for the feet and wrist locks and playing that different game, because when John was teaching me, it was the exact opposite of judo. So I was actually more drawn to it because I knew it was a safe thing to do, where my intuition wouldn't necessarily kick in because it doesn't exist.
It doesn't exist.
So it was an easier and safer place for me to train.
Before we wrap this up, is it difficult to flip the switch? Because I think that's one of the points that a lot of people might be struggling with as they are, exploring this conversation and maybe trying to implement this in their own lives. How do you flip the switch? How do you go, we are on jiu-jitsu mat, but we are standing up. Why in the world wouldn't you throw them? Because you're so good at it, but instead you're pulling guard and you're playing a pure jiu-jitsu game.
Because I like to win.
That's it.
I
knew you would say that too. Listen, before we finish, we didn't tell you this, but we have a small surprise. We have 5 questions for you. Some of them are silly, some of them are not. But listen, try to answer them the first thing that comes to mind. Keep it short. It doesn't, it's kind of a fun game that we do with everybody. And like I said, some of them are serious, but some of them are actually not. So we'll see where this goes, if you don't mind.
Yeah, and if you want, you don't have to limit it to judo, jiu-jitsu, life, whatever you want. But the first one is, what was it like the first time you stepped on the mat?
Scary.
Because of the instructor, or just because of who you were? Because you touched on it earlier, right? This guy was making this kid do push-ups.
I mean, stepping onto a judo mat for the first time would be like stepping into the octagon with no experience. It's not a fun place to be there, because there's no system in place for beginners. Like, here's what I want everybody to do. I want you to go up to a table that is 5 feet in the air, or find a ledge. Just look down and just fall off. Just see what happens. Tell me if you're nervous or scared, because when I throw you, you'll be 5.5 feet in the air and the floor is coming faster than you falling on your own, guaranteed.
And don't brace yourself.
That's a scary thought. And then when you step onto the mat and you feel it and you're like, this isn't as soft as I thought it would be.
Well, it's when we, coaching kids, the first time they get thrown and they cry, it's not because they're hurt. It's because they're terrified for that.
They're scared.
Yeah, it's a scary situation. So, all right, great answer. What has been your most rewarding achievement?
Making the Bundesliga team for TSV Augsburg.
Expand, because I don't think a lot of people are going to know exactly what that is.
So in judo, we compete professionally in teams in the Bundesliga in Europe. And basically there are clubs that compete within Germany. So Germany has an entire professional league where they fight 7 men against 7 men, and they fight, they go back to the locker rooms, and then they fight again, and that's that match. And they move through the system year round until they crown a German league champion at the end of the year. And then that same team also fights within Europe. So we fight French team, Turkish teams, Georgian teams, Russian teams in a special match at the end of the year. And TSV Augsburg is one of the best teams in the history of the Bundesliga. And when I was coming up after 2008, when I'd lost to Ole Bischoff, he was the 81 kilo player for Abensberg. And when I beat Bischoff and I won the German Grand Prix in 2010, the coach came up and had actually offered me a spot on the team. And I accepted shortly after. And it's the team that Jimmy fought for when he was an athlete. And on the team, it was me, Zantaraya, who was a multiple-time world champion. It was Iliadis. It was Lucas Krpalik, who was the Olympic champion in 2016. We had Uriarte from Spain. We had Rekishvili from Georgia. Our team was like an all-star team. So to be a part of it and be recognized as like that upper echelon means more than any one medal, because anybody can win a medal. Not everybody can have the respect of their peers. And so that signifying moment for me and staying on that team from 2010 until I retired meant more to me than any one medal, because it was about being a part of a community that was an elite group of judo players.
Wonderful.
That's awesome.
All right. Have you ever wanted to quit?
All time. I've actually written 2 quitting letters. Maybe 3. 2 for sure.
What's a quitting letter for those who don't know?
I basically wrote a letter to USA Judo, using a lot of language we probably shouldn't use here on camera. Basically telling them I'm done with the sport of judo. I'm not coming back. I want nothing more to do with it.
And what preceded those?
What was that?
What preceded those letters being written? You don't have to go into full detail or give names or anything, but was it just the system wasn't working for you, or was it one particular loss? So you it flipped a switch?
After London, I felt like the entire world of judo had cheated me from that semifinal.
Mm-hmm.
I had felt I had been screwed over a few other times. And, it got to a point where I was so angry that, I cussed out a ref after losing a match. I threw a water bottle at the head referee and missed his head by like a few inches. I flipped him off in the middle of a tournament, screamed at him, got suspended from the IJF tour. Like I was so angry and bitter that like I just couldn't handle it. And so I went to a World Cup in Poland or Austria. It was one of those places. And I lost in the second round to like a 17-year-old kid. I was like, I couldn't even fathom like continuing after taking 5th at the Olympic Games to showing up at a World Cup. I barely made it out of the first round. I got thrown 3 times in 3 minutes, almost got pinned by a Georgian player who doesn't do any groundwork. I was like, this is ridiculous. I quit. I sat at the bar at the hotel. I wrote this big, long letter. I was like, I'm fucking done. Jimmy called me on the phone and he was like, calm yourself down, make it through camp, go fight Germany. I don't care how you do, just get through it. And then we'll go from there. And I was like, fuck you, fuck you, fuck you, fuck this guy, fuck everybody, I'm out. And then I remember before the tournament, I was like, fuck all of you. I don't even care about the rules of judo. I'm going to go kick the shit out of some people. I don't even care if I lose. And then I ended up winning the tournament. So
had to get it off your chest, right?
Yeah, because it's kind of like you have to fall to that low to like let go of all that baggage that you're hanging on to. That again goes back to what I said earlier about when you're at practice and you're just being negative, right? Like, oh, I can't do this, I can't do that. They changed this rule, they changed that rule. This gi's too big. This sucks. Like all you're doing is fighting the system.
Yeah. Do you think you got out of your own head at that point? Probably.
Correct.
Right?
I gotten so angry that I just threw my hands in the air and said, screw it. Shido me out. I don't even care anymore. And it actually caused me to like let go and perform.
Cool. All right. Describe your feelings when you received your black belt. And it could be in any discipline.
Which one?
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. I guess, well, I mean, you were pretty young when you got your first, but if that's the one you want to go with.
For judo, I didn't really care. It was to be expected, right? Like I had actually anticipated like, oh, I should be getting my black belt, right? I am beating everybody and I plan on going to the Olympics. So this is a thing that just happens.
Mm-hmm.
And when you get a black belt in judo, it actually doesn't signify that you know anything in the sport of judo.
Right.
It's actually like your base level of, okay, now you can perform and practice and develop your judo because you know enough of the basics where you can start learning. That's all it signifies. That's why when, you know, you look at like some of the UFC fighters and like some of the jiu-jitsu people that take these private lessons from judo black belts, you're like, you know, that person doesn't really know judo, right? Like, probably not the best way to spend your time. Whereas in jiu-jitsu, like it actually signifies and holds meaning and standing within the community. So that one was more important to me. And that one I was really excited and happy to get. But I was too tired to show any kind of like emotion because John had really put me through the ringer for like 2 hours.
Did you know what was coming?
I didn't.
No.
I thought I just pissed John off.
All right.
He was picking all my rounds, all my positions. Like when every time I got ahead, he was like, "Nope, Travis, change bottom half guard." And I was like, "I just got on top, man. I need a break. It's hard to get from bottom to top. Do you know that? I don't know if you know that."
Was this against him or was he throwing people at you the whole time?
Throwing people at me. He was just picking people in the room and picking. So he was basically taking what I feel are like the people in the positions they're good at, and then putting me in their positions and seeing how I handled it. Right. That's what it, looking back, that's what it felt like. At the time, I thought he was just pissed off and trying to prove a point.
Well, he did prove a point, didn't he? Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And then here you go. This is for either or, but do you wash your belt?
Nope.
See, I don't find you to be a superstitious person in the short time we've talked, but is it for the superstitious reasons?
Nope.
No? You just don't?
I don't really have a good answer for that. But my belt never goes home. It stays at the club. So like even in Japan, like the belt stays. It doesn't necessarily go home. So I'm not sure. I've heard some people with like the superstitions and the washing and all of that. I don't know. I also have like 14 belts. So
what's the reason? Yeah. There's a reason. All right. That's a different answer than we usually get, but that's why we ask it. So
that's it.
All right.
Thanks for sharing your story and your thoughts. I found it very, very interesting and very useful to see to see and hear your perspective, especially on the education part and how do you strategically approach winning and how you strategically approach training.
Before we end it, just because you had talked about that educational part.
Yeah.
We just launched the American Judo system.
Yes.
Because I've been coaching now for 4 years, and I have this group of young athletes, and it dawned on me that people are so set in their ways, like unbelievably so, that the act of teaching martial arts has not improved since the dawn of time. Like you guys have years of experience. Name me one teaching tool that has come up in the last 10 years to actually help people improve. Right?
I agree.
So it's like, it's one of those things where it's like, has anybody actually like taken the time to look at how the actual information is put forth for people to actually keep it? And so what I did was I actually dumbed down the sport so far that the goal isn't to say, hey, you need to actually all go back to white belts. It's to say, hey, I want you to practice going back to the very origin of every technique so that you can ramp up really quickly and then start practicing the hierarchy of throws, right? Because if you look at a throw like Uchimata, for example, it is very difficult to hold a 200-pound man on one leg, half on your side, half on your back, and balance. Just think about that. Some people can't stand on one leg for 30 seconds.
Period. Yep.
Period, right? But they try to learn a throw like Uchimata. So like we dumb down the system of judo so far down to where just the very essence of the basics are taught in their individual segments, so that the information is presented on what is the goal of today's lesson and how quickly can you get through this information to get better. That way, nothing is overlooked. When you look at judo and jiu-jitsu, there are so many aspects that are never talked about or spoken for. It's just, you learn it through osmosis. So I want you to think about, for anybody who's a coach listening to this, I want you to think about the next time you teach a technique, did you have to bring it back in and re-show your students? If the answer is yes, I want you to think about two things. One, is it the student's fault that the information wasn't retained, or did you do a poor job of presenting it? And for me, I felt like I was doing a poor job of presenting it because I was throwing too many key points of information, or I threw out 3 points of information, but I actually showed 10. Like I used my left foot for this, my right foot for that. I talked about this grip, then I talked about this cross grip, then I talked about the angle of importance and the angle of off balance to this one thing. And my blue belts are like, what the fuck just happened? Right? Because you do things without realizing it. So take a step back when you're teaching and try to get the number of times you have to bring them back in to say the same thing twice. Dumb it down, have them go practice and learn to recognize what you want. Because if you can condition them to never have to reteach, you're conditioning them to learn through all aspects of life, and learn to look at jiu-jitsu, because the hip position matters, the angles matter, and nobody talks about it and nobody teaches it because we all feel like it's boring.
Yeah, teaching is a completely different animal. Just because one is phenomenal in martial arts, whether judo, jiu-jitsu, wrestling, whatever it might be, doesn't matter, taekwondo, karate, does not make them good instructor or teacher or coach. I think there's a two separate skill set, and unfortunately a lot of instructors take it for granted, and they don't take time to educate themselves how to be a good instructor and how to benefit their own students. And unfortunately, being an instructor, we do have to take responsibility for our students and not learning as fast, or not learning, period. You know, it is, end of the day, it's our responsibility to make sure they sponge it, and it's difficult.
I remember somebody in a cast asked me how I felt when I got my red and white belt for judo, and I was like, I don't know, I didn't really feel like anything, because I feel like it doesn't symbolize anything other than time and grade, right? Because it doesn't signify that I won an Olympic medal. It doesn't signify that I reached the highest level of sport. It doesn't signify that I'm a good coach, right? Because nobody actually tested me on my actual knowledge. It's an assumed presumption, right? And people take it for granted that, oh, you've been doing this for 20 years. But have you been doing the same thing for 20 years? So you have 1 year of experience repeated 20 times? Or do you have 20 years of actual knowledge where you've actually learned and improved as a person? Yeah. It's an important question that everybody should probably be asking themselves. And if you're stuck at a rank, that is definitely a question you should be asking yourself.
I think that's a good one. Travis, thank you for being here. Thank you for sharing all of your stories and all of the deep insights, with us and with the listeners. We love having you on the show. How can people find you, including your brand new launched website, your instructional judo website?
Probably Instagram is the easiest, or YouTube. Those are the two that I really pay attention to. I check Facebook once a month. I really don't like Facebook, but Instagram is easy for me and YouTube is easy for me.
Any websites?
Just the USAjudo.com.
USAjudo.com. We'll post a link in the show notes, so check it out. I've seen parts of it. It's I actually quite like it.
Yeah. Is the American judo system available to everyone?
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
and we're actually going to, starting January to February, we're actually going to launch a rank promotion where you can actually get promoted online.
Wonderful.
Through video submission.
Oh, nice.
There you go.
I can skip my sensei and go right to that. I don't have to worry about it anymore.
Yep.
He'll be happy to hear that. He'll have to deal with me less. Cool. I appreciate everything. I took a lot of notes today. Very informative. So thank you so much. Thomas?
Travis, thank you for being here. Thank you for sharing everything in us.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Care.
Take care. Peace.
Thank you for listening to RŌL Radio. If you enjoyed the show, don't forget to leave us a review and help us make the show even more amazing. For future episodes, check out our website and follow us on all major podcast platforms. Take care.